Hi, everyone. My name is Marcy Boyd, and I am joined by a few people today. We are working with you guys, and we are going to be working on data analysis review. So we got some tech support. We got a couple people taking on the Q&A and stuff like that. So we're glad to have you here with us. We are Team Fileable, and we're today going to be talking about SAT math practice data analysis. All right, so there is all of our social media. Feel free, connect with us. We love hearing from you. All right, if you can, just kind of making sure things are working on your end. Choose an emoji that best describes how you're feeling right now. That could be about the data analysis. It just could be, hey, it's a Sunday. This is what I got for you. Also allows extra people as they're coming in to join us. Just kind of getting used to the platform, getting used to each other. Again, my name is Marcy Boyd. We got a couple more people kind of working behind the scenes to help all of us out. If you need help or need anything, feel free. Let us know. It's usually going to be Brandon or Davina probably answering on the Q&A. Got Peter kind of helping with the live stream, and my name is Marcy. Okay, first few slides, what we are going to talk about is, are you ready? And we're just even talking just about technology. So before we get into the data analysis, let's just talk about the SAT, the calculator, all right? First of all, this is not the time to learn a new calculator. Don't the day before the test say, oh, somebody told me I need to be using this instead. Don't change calculators. Every calculator that you're allowed to use on the SAT is the perfect calculator for you. You want to go in with the one that you are familiar with, okay? So if you are not sure which calculators are allowed, I'm just going to kind of look at it quick. Just you can put in the Q&A if you're not sure if your calculator is allowed. But the first thing we want to remind you, make sure it's charged. Yes, you have to bring your own calculator. They are not provided at any of the test centers. I tell my students to bring 2 calculators with them. Do not lend them out. I know that sounds weird because we're all about sharing, but you paid for this test. Don't share your calculator. If one dies, you can't say, I lent it out. Can I have it back? It doesn't work that way. So take your own calculator, take 1 or 2, take a calculator that you're used to, all right? So on this, and if you're looking for it later, it is just college readiness, where you can just Google SAT calculators allowed. That's perfectly well, right? This does have, it says, bring your own, you can't share, don't bring a brand new calculator, bring one that you're familiar with, okay? Acceptable calculators, most of them are allowed, right? I, for example, use Texas Instruments, but this is a great chart here. You choose the brand that you're used to, and it tells you which ones you are allowed to use, okay? There's tons of them. The SAT does allow both the 89 and the CAS. It's the ACT that does not, okay? So pretty much, if you've been using it, it's a calculator that's allowed on the SAT, right? But that is really nice. Like I said, if you just kind of Google which calculator, it brings brands and models. You can choose which brand you use in your school, or you have, or you're used to using, and it'll come up which ones. But that's the most important thing. You have to bring your own and make sure it's one that you're used to. Okay. Do you know how to check and make sure that it's charged? Usually up at the top right-hand side, just like your phone. Do you have a charger? If not, make sure you charge it at school, right? If that's one that is school property and you need to put it on a charging dock and you don't have this. Do you know that you can take a spare? Already kind of mentioned that. Okay. Moving along, we are talking about part 3, and we are going to talk about both non-calculator and calculator because, again, today is data analysis, and it is mostly with calculator, but we're going to hit both kinds of questions, all right? So part 3, non-calculator, is 25 minutes. Part 4, that allows the calculator, is 55 minutes. Okay, so you will have some data analysis of both kinds. So we're going to hit those both for you. SAT, all the topics. Again, we're covering that third bullet down, data analysis. But just so you know, the 6 topics basically are algebra, problem solving, data analysis, what they call advanced topics, geometry, and trig. Okay, in this stream, we are going to be talking about the data analysis, that third bullet. That really is broken down into statistics, mean, median, mode, standard deviation, the spread, how close things are, how normal they are, graph interpretation, meaning you're given a graph and you're asked questions about it, or you are given data and you will choose to enter the data in and either ask the calculator to calculate one var stats or to do a histogram that you can then interpret. Also generating plots on your calculator. So will you generate a graph of a histogram so that you can then interpret it? Right? Okay, so background information, problem solving and data analysis questions might ask you to create an appropriate equation from a word problem. They might ask you to convert units, might ask you to understand the meaning of different numbers or variables if you're given an equation. So we might be given y equals mx plus b, a linear equation where our rate of change, which we also call our slope, could teach us about the statistics or the slope of what's happening in the real world, the word problem that they've given us. So you might need to use different properties of operations. And so if you're entering these in your calculator, it's kind of like that PEMDAS, right? So our order of operations, and our calculator already has that programmed in, but sometimes for our brain to understand and get that right, we need to pay attention to that parentheses and exponents. Okay. All right, problems in this category, you are going to be using ratio. Now, ratio is just a fancy word for fraction, right? So a probability of girls to guys, 1 to 2, right? 4 to 10. Usually the numerator for probability and statistics, our numerator is always smaller because our probability goes from 0 to 100 or 0 to 1 if we're talking whole numbers. Rates, proportions. Again, proportions are when we have 2 fractions with an equal sign between them. So in college and beyond, you are going to be interpreting and what they call synthesizing data. Does it make sense? Is this a good measure? Which measure is best for us between mean, median, mode, standard deviation? So these are skills that are good, and that's why the SAT chooses to test them. All right, again, just kind of talking about different problems that we're going to see, and these are the ones that we're concentrating on in the examples. Few examples, problems that you're going to be asked to solve. Converting units, for example, problem that we're given might start with kilometers per hour, but then they'll say which is the following best or closest to correct answer in meters per second. Choosing appropriate graph representations for data sets. Interpreting the slope and the intercept of a line. Remember that our intercept tells us the starting value, which stands for the y-intercept. So in terms of data analysis, that is, again, important for physics and our sciences. When time is 0, what's the height or what's the amount that is present at the starting time? And then our slope is what's the rate of increase, rate of decrease, velocity, speed. So all of those kind of tying in what we know from Algebra 1, middle school and 9th grade math, tying that into what we're going to be using for real world scenarios and our sciences. Along with that, we'll be talking about problems with computing as well as interpreting probability. Some of those involve problems where we're given the information in a table. Evaluating statistical claims or the results of a study. So a claim might be given to us and we might be asked, how confident are we in accepting this as an output? Or a study was done. Was the data collected randomly enough? Was it information that we can trust? Were there enough in that population sample to make us feel confident with the result? And the last, using percentages in a variety of contexts, sometimes talking about discount, for example, at a store, finding an interest rate, finding tax or tip. So again, they're trying to kind of put this into real world situation that might be useful. Okay, so we are going to start with the non-calculator. Non-calculator section, again, is section 3. So we're concentrating on section 3, which is the non-calculator, and then we'll follow that up with the calculator section. So starting out, our non-calculator section, our third section in the SAT, is our math. We will have 25 minutes to do 20 questions. Now, in that, those are broken down into 15 multiple choice questions and 5 grid-in questions. The multiple choice will be choose the one best answer, okay? And the grid-in questions, your answer might be 0.25. You'll write that in the spot up at the top, and then you'll bubble in those answers. So when they say grid-in, it's those on your bubble sheet. All right. So let's jump right in. So what I have in each of these, the way that these questions are, is I apologize. Some of them, especially in this topic, are a little kind of word heavy. But what I did is I put all the questions on one page, and then I have the thoughts and solutions on the next page with our answer. All right. So here, 2 classes for a quiz. We are given dot plots. So if you're not familiar with a dot plot is really just a histogram, right? But instead of bars that are touching, then they're not touching. They're just dots instead of columns. So dot plots shown to the left summarize scores for a quiz. Each class, you have class A and class B, each one has 24 students. Which of the following correctly compares the standard deviation of the scores for each of the classes? Okay, so to me, this one was maybe a little stress causing for some of my students because my students don't have the formula memorized for standard deviation, right? And I thought that this was interesting because some of my students would try to put in all those scores, which is fine, right? So if I'm looking at class A, one student got a 0, one student got a 1. So if you were somebody that you're going to enter this into your calculator, you absolutely can. You can do stat edit. So in class A, I would enter 0, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, and so on until I have 24 entries. And then I could do my stat calculate 1 var statistics. And it'll give me my standard deviation, my mean, median, mode. They're called the 5-number summaries. Okay, so if you've done that, that's perfectly fine. Mainly concentrated on in an Algebra 1 class statistics. Okay, so don't panic if you haven't had an Algebra 2 or a pre-calculus or a college statistics. Not needed. You do not need the long formula for standard deviation. Really, all they're asking is that you know what standard deviation is. So if you look at those choices, you do not have to put all those data in, right? If we remember that standard deviation really means how far away is it from the mean, maybe we can kind of look at that, right? So as we're looking at these choices, it says standard deviation for A is smaller, B is smaller, they are both the same, or there's not enough information. Now, when I first start looking at this with my students, I think that most of them say, all right, it's not C, because those spreads there, the data does not look the same. So I'm going to guess that the standard deviation is not the same. Absolutely true. Right? A lot of my students will first look at this and say, Class A, it looks like my mean is somewhere between 3 and 4, right? Maybe a little closer to 3 because I have that 0 and 1. And for Class B, they're going to say, hey, I got what's called a uniform distribution. So my mean's right in the middle, probably 2.5. Okay. But what I'm looking at is not the mean, but the standard deviation. So how far is the spread away from the mean? Okay. So let's look. And what I'm saying is you can put in all of those data, like I said, and do your 1-var stats, but I'm not sure that you need to. So I'm going to go forward a slide, talk to you about my thoughts through rationalizing these 4 choices, and then I'll come back and show you what I'm talking about. So I have my answer there already. If you got it right, excellent. So what I have is standard deviation is how much difference is there from the data values away from the mean or average. And so I called that the word spread, right? So I've kind of verbalized it, but I want to kind of read it and talk through it and make sure that you understand what I was saying. So if I look at the spread, Class A has a lot of the data values being 3 and 4. That means the mean is between 3 and 4. Standard deviation is pretty small because most of the scores are near there. So looking back at that, you see exactly what I was saying. Since this here is pretty much what we call a bell curve, right? The same. So my mean is going to be here. These two might drag it down a little bit. So maybe 3.4, right? And so because everything is pretty much the same amount away, that's why I'm saying Class A is a pretty small standard deviation, right? That second bullet, though, I said I used the word uniform distribution, right? Since B is uniformly distributed, it also means that the data is more spread out. What I mean by that is my average or mean is right in the middle, 2.5. There's a lot of spread over here, 2.5 this way and this way, right? Where from here, if it's, a little over 3.4, something like that, so much is right in the middle. That's a lot of data values that are really close to the average. And so because of that, I have a smaller standard deviation. So my answer for that is A. Again, just to recap, I can put what would amount to 48 data values in there. I just think if you understand the word standard deviation, that phrase, I don't think that you need to. Okay. Again, SAT and ACT, they are testing speed and accuracy. So you need to remember you have, if we go back here, you only got 25 minutes to do 20 questions. So that's a pretty quick rate, right? And this is a non-calculator. So me saying put them in, depends. This exact example I did take off of a non-calculator, but they do sometimes give you the ability to do this, and sometimes it makes it worse because then you spend a lot of time figuring out the data values, putting them in your calculator. So my big takeaway for this question is I probably would not spend the time entering it in. I would instead concentrate on the knowledge that standard deviation is how far away from the average am I. And so Class A is pretty close, where this is uniform, so my mean is right in the middle. I got a lot of distance away. I got 4 scores, 2.5 below and 2.5 above, where here everything is a lot closer. Okay. All right. Inference is you inferring or coming to a logical conclusion with the information that's given to you. So again, a non-calculator example. A market researcher chooses 200 people at random. So a couple things in order to make a good inference. We need to have a large enough sample and we need to see the word random. Okay, so 200 is pretty big, right? So that's going to be our population, right? So we have 200 people chosen from random from a group of people who say they liked a certain book. So Then pick your favorite book, right? 200 people like a book. They're asked this question. They watch the movie. They all like the book. They watched the movie for that book. And then they were asked if they liked the movie. They read the book first. Of those surveyed, 95% said they did not like the movie. They still like the book, but they don't like the movie. So which of the following inferences can be drawn from this survey? To me, this is a math question, but wow, it is a reading question, isn't it? I mean, there's really not math to do. You're not even worried about putting it in your calculator. This really is a heavy reading question. So choice A says at least 95% of people who go see movies will dislike the movie. At least 95% of people who read books will dislike the movie. Maybe a little closer. Most people who dislike the book, we weren't told anything about who disliked the book. We only have 200 people that like it. So the very last one is, I think, the best worded correct answer. Most people who like the book, that's the 200 people we had, will dislike the movie. I think the word most is probably encompassing of 95%. So in my opinion, this really doesn't seem like a heavy math question, but it is a math question because it is testing inferences of percentages and large random samples. So they do consider that a data analysis or statistics question. So if you got D, you go. So what I wrote here is for surveys, generalization can only be made about a population that is studied, meaning we only know that there are 200 people that like the book. I have no information about how many didn't. They didn't say 200 of 500. They didn't give us any other information at all. So we only know about the 200 people. In this case, the population is the people who read and liked the book, 200 people. And then the only choice that puts into words only that population is going to be choice D. Okay. All right. Next. Okay. And like I said on this topic, I did concentrate a little bit more on the calculator questions for the data analysis. So I tried to do 2 of the non-calculator type, but I did find more examples with calculator questions. Okay. So on the calculator section, this is called section 4 on the SAT. So sections 1 and 2 are your English side of things and reading. And section 3 is the non-calculator math, which does have some data analysis in it. And now we're talking about the 4th section on the SAT, which is our calculator math section. 55 minutes for 38 questions. Now this one I kind of broke down a little bit more. It is 30 and 8. So 30 multiple choice questions, choose the best one choice answer. 8 grid in questions, which I then said that does include one extended thinking question. And what I mean by that is they will give you a scenario and they might ask 2 or 3 questions about it. So that's where they're talking about extended thinking question. And this topic does kind of hit that sometimes. They will give you a case study, for example, and then they might ask, the first question might ask about the mean, median, or mode. Second question might be an inference question about that. Okay. Everybody good so far? All right. Let's jump in. Okay. A furniture store buys its furniture from a wholesale dealer. We're talking about a table. The store usually charges its cost plus 75% markup. During a sale, the store charges the wholesale plus 15%. If the sale price of the table is $299, what is the usual price of the table? So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds, maybe a minute or so. I will just set a timer for a minute. Oops, timer for 1 minute now. Try that. Okay. Says we are up. Doesn't mean anything if you didn't get it yet. I just wanted to give you some kind of wait time so that I give you a little peace and quiet as you're looking through it. So first of all, it says if the sale price is $299, what is the usual price? So the first thing I talk to my students about is, do I want my answer smaller, bigger, the same? And so I was okay with this one because I said, all right, the usual price should be more, but all the choices are more. So that didn't really help me in this case. So let's look at kind of ways that we could do this. And if you got the answer B, awesome. But what I'm looking at is I talk to my students a lot about the idea is if I'm going to talk about 15% or 1.15. Now this means 100% and 15%, right? So the reason I'm saying that is I'm charging, think about what this problem says. During the sale, it's the wholesale price, which is the 100% that the company paid, plus, and, or a decimal point, 15%. Now, you probably know by this point that your graphing calculators don't have a percent key, right? At least Texas Instrument, which is the one that a lot of schools use. So understanding that it's wholesale cost, 100% plus 0.15, because 15% is 0.15. That sale price is $299. So I talk to my students a lot about translating. So if this was English and Spanish, we would understand. So math is just another foreign language. What I want to think about is translating that English on the previous page to this math sentence. 100% and 15% of the cost is $299. So what did this first line here is, so what did the wholesaler charge the company? So the wholesaler charged them $260. That's not the answer, right? Which is good. On this one, that wasn't given to us, right? So it says 260 is what the wholesaler charged us. They want to know what's the usual price. Now remember, the usual price is the wholesale price 100% plus 0.75. So my 1.75 here times the cost. My cost is 260. So I substituted that in to find the cost that the company usually charges for the table. Okay. This absolutely is not the only way that this problem can be solved, right? So if you got answer B, you did it great. So I expect that that might be some of the questions that might be coming up into the chat that people are answering for you. I did it a different way. Does this work? Does that work? If you got B, you did it right. Okay, so I absolutely would say that I would also consider doing this problem with proportions. If you are from a common core state, though, sometimes proportions you don't really think about cross multiplying, you then think about getting a common denominator. So seriously, it just remembers how you would have been taught to do this. I tried to keep this solution as general as possible because it didn't matter whether you're a common core state or not. It matters your thought process for it. So I'm just going to slide back one more time just so you see. So if you got choice B, you did awesome. Even if, and it would be awesome, it would be fantastic if you found different solution methods than I did, right? Especially if your solution method was faster than a minute. If you got that in the minute, then you're doing good. Okay. Moving on. Next one. Kyron borrows $560,000 from a bank in December. Each January, so that's the end of a year. The next month starts a new year. So it says each January, the bank charges Kyron a fee that is 7% of what he owes plus this fee. So if Kyron doesn't pay that debt, he doesn't pay anything for full 2 years, right? What's going to be the sum of all of his bank fees during those years? Okay. I'm going to, again, set it for 1 minute so that I keep myself from telling you anything. See how you do. Okay, again, that is our timer. So let's talk about this. First of all, things that I want to kind of pop up here. Again, we got a percent. So Kyron has $560,000 December. Very next month, hasn't paid anything. So he's going to have to pay 7%. Right? Remaining unpaid debt. So that's his whole 560,000. So when I multiply 0.07 times 560,000, I end up with $39,200. That is his fee, right? And then it says it adds the fee to his total debt. So I need to take that 39,200 and add the 560,000. So now at the end of the first, because it says he's not touching anything, he's not paying, he's not borrowing more. So at the end of the first year, do you have that he owes $599,200? So then the next January, he's got to pay 7%, but of that, right? So now I got 41,900 plus his previous balance, which was that over here, in case I'm saying numbers too much. So I did my very first thing. I did 7% of 560,000. So his first year, that's the fee he had to pay. I got to take that fee and add it to the starting balance of 560,000. So this will make the end of his second year, or beginning of his second year, I guess, right? This much. That January, now he's got to pay 7% on that, which I have as $41,944. Now he's got to add that, right? But here's the thing. When I first looked at this, I'm like, okay, I need to pay attention. It's what's the sum of his fees. It's not what is his ending balance. So I am not going to add that 41,944. I'm not going to add that to the 599,200. Okay. And it's close. There is an answer that's real close. When I added that, I got about 641,000. So keeping in mind that that's not right. They're saying what's the sum of his bank fees. So I should think it's definitely not going to be C and D. Right. Also, the other mistake some students would make is that they would take this and double it. And so if they said the 39,200 doubled, that's my 78,400. There is my, I like to tell my students the best wrong answer, but it's the first one. So it kind of catches your eye if you didn't know what you were looking at. Okay. Reason choice A is not correct. Is it says that we're going to take the fee and add it to the rest of his debt. So his second year, it's not 560,000 anymore, but it's that 599 is his balance that then we have to figure out the 7% on. Okay, so if you got A, I would say that was the closest mistake, and to understand why that was a mistake, B is the correct answers, and hopefully as you're kind of getting better and into that test taking mode strategy, looking and reading the fact that it says What are the sum of his fees? Not going to be more than what he owes. Okay, they just want the fees, not his ending balance. Great. So should get B for that one. All right. Now, this is one of those that I told you I wanted to talk about, a key feature of the graph. Okay. So I got Bank of Australia. Again, kind of move this from or kind of use this from lending rates from a Bank of Australia, and try to use a few different sources for some of this stuff. So the SAT and the ACT are really trying to make things real world, okay? Really finding some emphasis there. So we got key features of graph. We have a graph given to us, the Bank of Australia interest rate over a 10-year period. That 10-year period starts, as we're reading what we call the x-axis, starts from January 2004, goes to January 2013. Right? Notice that's the last label. It really goes further, right? So kind of understanding how that graph means. Might go till December of 2013 to get our 10-year period. And the interest rate is over on the side, and it's given as 6.5%, 7%. All right. So the question I kind of put over on the right-hand side, Bank of Australia's secured residential term interest rate from 2004 to 2013, shown in the graph above. The interest on a home loan is charged at the Bank of Australia's rate based on the total amount of the loan. If a home purchased in 2005 with a loan amount of $450,000, about how much interest was charged? So again, I'm going to start that for a minute. Okay. Let's talk through it. Okay. Now, what I was looking at here is, it says that a loan, about how much interest was charged. So if we're looking at 2005, right, what we really have to do here is we have to understand what interest is. And I'm looking here at 2005. The interesting thing that made this problem easier is that the rate here was the same for just about the whole year, right? So my rate following across is about 7.5% or 0.075. So that's great. Now what I have to know is I have to know, what do I do with that? So that 450,000 is going to be multiplied by, right, interest rate of or on $450,000. So I'm going to have $450,000 times 0.075. All those choices are really close. So it does make it a little more important that we enter things correctly. So on that, I ended up not getting an exact answer when I put 450,000 and I multiplied it by 0.075. I got about 33,750, right? So I might look at this and say, oh no, it's right in between. Sure, but it's only $50 away from this one. Okay, and the SAT and the directions will always say choose the best correct answer. Okay, so again, I wrote this in Oh, you know what? Did I just misspeak? I think I just said I got this one, but I didn't. It was 32, 750 said. Sorry about that. But so I wrote it down here. Anyway, so looking at the graph, followed 2005 height, approximate it. So I said it was about 7.25. Right here is where I said 7.25 here, but it's between. It could even be right in here, right? So I have 7, between 7 and 7.5. I said, hey, let's pull that at 7.25, 7.5, either one, but that is where our difference might be here. Okay, so I went with 7.25, 7.4. It looks like I used now on my calculator. I multiply by that the price of the house at 450,000, and I got close to that 32,000 answer. So I have not exactly, but real close. Right. So I do always like to tell my students, I will try and pick problems for them that you don't get exactly the answer. Because again, we are reading from a chart and we're trying to approximate. So don't panic if you don't get the exact answer. That's part of they're not doing it to trick you, but they're doing it to kind of point out test taking strategies and approximation skills. Okay. So if you got B or C, good idea or good choice. I would say choice B is my closest. Okay. All right. Let's make sure I'm doing okay on time. Excellent. We are doing good. All right. I'm trying to leave at least a couple minutes at the end just in case Davina or Brandon had more questions in the Q&A that we can all kind of talk about. So this is really our last question. That'll give us about 7-10 minutes for questions in the Q&A. If you have, that I'm talking too fast and you need some of that. All right. So again, kind of looking at this case, a table. So we've done a little bit of reading graphs, tables, trying to predict the answer. Now we're talking about something at least that I will count in with the proportion section of this. So I have this chart given to me and it says feeding information for boarded pets. Looks like this boarding kennel or boarding group boards dogs or cats. Some of them are only fed dry dog food. Some get both dry and wet food. Okay, I got the total number of cats, total number of dogs, and then everything is added up and they make sure that everything adds up and down. So adding kind of horizontally, vertically, everything is 41. All right, so on the question it says that the table to the left shows the kind of that are fed to cats and dogs boarding at a certain facility. What fraction of the dogs are fed only dry food? Now, I intentionally did not enunciate any of those words. I just wanted to read it straightforward. So again, I'm going to set the timer and give you a chance. Okay, so my reason for including this kind of question is I think sometimes students look at this and think, yes, this is really easy. And then they start looking at the choices. Well, sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes they just kind of start with this. So let me talk through some of the choices and kind of look at how are we choosing, right? So all these choices could easily be rationed, I guess, or rationalized in your brain. So 2 out of 41, we're probably, majority of us looking at this saying dogs that only eat dry food, because it's right there, dogs only dry food. Their intersection, if you will, is 2. So I'm going to eliminate C, and I'm going to say my answer is either A, B, or D, because it's 2 over something. Okay. All right. Not a bad thought, right? And I would definitely agree with that. So my very first thought process might be let's bail, because 7 out of 41 is all animals that eat only dry food over all the animals. So I can get rid of C. Okay, so if we did that, great work. The rest, though, what happens is some of my test takers will look at this and say, all right, the dogs that eat only dry food, 2 of them out of 41, because the total is 41, right? But it says what fraction of the dogs are fed only dry food. This 41 includes the cats as well. Okay, so 240 were first, how I could rationalize it and how I could argue against it, right? And if I can argue against it, it's probably not true. Next, 2 out of 25 and 2 out of 7. Well, if I look at fed only dry food is 2, out of everybody that's fed dry food is 7. Okay, that makes sense. But again, fed only dry food now, I'm including non-dogs, right? So this question is saying what fraction of dogs? If I would have enunciated dogs or said of only dogs, it might have helped you a little bit more, but that's not what the question did, right on the practice test. So the only dry food of only dogs. Okay, so in this one, this was a calculator question, but I'm pretty much positive that you don't need to use a calculator for this question. It really comes down to, again, you talking yourself into or out of or rationalizing the wording of the question, if you will. So if you kind of missed that, oops, there we go, is reason that I'm saying B. It's not too bad, but you have to read carefully. We're going to kind of talk about this as a ratio. Number of dogs fed only dry food, which we all agreed was 2. That's why we knocked out choice C, right? Over the total number of dogs. And that's where the should I go with 7 or 25? I'm looking at dogs. Their total is 25. So that's where we went with B instead. Okay, so just kind of a couple things to kind of summarize us a little bit. And then, like I said, my goal was to leave about 7 minutes to, allow for any like Q&A, any last things that you guys want. So we got data. So I guess you could say things are pretty serious. Just kind of making a little humor, but I hope that you realize the data is not, the statistics, the analysis, data analysis, all that is fancy words. And usually it comes down to on the SAT, if you slow down and read it, the questions aren't that bad. You're just going to think through them for yourself. Okay, so I think that we can usually agree sometimes on this section for the SAT, it is the more writing that we have, or the more reading that we have to do. There are a little more word problems. They're not hard formulas, but it's reading and understanding what is being asked in the question that we just have to be cautious about, and reading the choices as carefully as we're reading the question. Right. So saying it's pretty serious, I want us to take that lightly, because I don't think that the math in this section is difficult, but the rationalizing through it, answering kind of correctly based on our logic. So in this question, or in this section for the SAT, this topic, I would definitely say don't second guess yourself. Your first thought process is usually the correct one. So this would be a section where I read it, I think through it, There might be one bad answer to get rid of, like on that last question. The other questions may be similar, where like that last question, all of the other three had choice 2 or had 2 on the top. That's fine. Now we're going to rationalize why things do or don't work. And as soon as we can find a reason something doesn't, cross that choice out. Right? So not hard math on here. A little more, maybe 60-40. So of the percent that's on the data analysis, a little bit more tend to fall on the calculator section, but not difficult math. And sometimes those problems that fall out in the calculator section, you don't need the calculator for at all. So remember, the SAT is testing you on speed and accuracy. Read carefully, read all the choices, but then once you do, don't go back and second guess yourself or talk yourself out of something. Okay, so like I said, not bad. I will have, when I'm done talking, we should have about 7 minutes left in case you have some questions or anything that you want to ask in our Q&A. Shoot us an email, put it in the chat, hit us up right now in the Q&A. We would love, between Brandon and Davina and myself, love to answer any questions that you might have right now. Again, reminder about the social media, but absolutely any questions you have. Look at that, right about 7 minutes. Wanted to have a little time so that you didn't feel like I talked to the entire time jabbering at you and then you had no time to ask any questions that might come up. So just kind of said, have a question, you feel free anytime. Take a picture of this last slide if you want. Shoot an email anytime. We have great people to answer your questions at any time. Hit us up on social media. We are always here to help you every step of the way. And just kind of checking in with the other two TAs, just making sure that if they need help on the Q&As, if you guys are asking questions faster, just seeing if I should jump out of this screen and go in and help. Okay, and Davina and Brandon are working on the Q&A section. Okay, I would say as I'll kind of keep talking just for a couple minutes as they're working on the Q&A section. This is a little less probability or likelihood that's asked on the SAT, but it is also one that is missed. Now, I tell my students, I don't think that the data analysis section is missed a lot because people are bad at it. I think that they psych themselves out. So they definitely get nervous about the reading on the math section. We shouldn't have to read, right? Or they read too quick, or they see the word like the very first one that we did, that's standard deviation, and they panic. You don't need the formula for it. You can just read through and understand that that means how far spread out are they. You should know mean, median, and mode, but that's from middle school. So it's kind of just kind of repeating that. So yes, this is a highly missed section on the SAT, but I think it shouldn't be, especially for you guys kind of walking through this. Oh, good question. I got a couple here. The graph question. Recap if I was doing a bubble sheet. One of each of those two. Let me just double check. The answer was a 0.2. So let's go back to the clarify the graph question. When entering the answer, should I bubble in 0.2 or 0.2? Okay, so one thing is if you have, maybe I'm not sure which one. I'm thinking when it says the graphing question, it's this. So I do want to talk about this one and make sure we're good with that. But also it said, if I'm entering in something that is not a multiple choice, should I enter in 0.2 or 0.2? The grid ends up at the top. If it just gives you 2 spaces, you'll do 0.2. If it gives you 3, you can do 0.2. The SAT will accept either answer. Okay. And sometimes what you'll see is like the very first column might just have a plus or a minus. So sometimes it'll help you on those grid in answers, which they want you to do. The thing I like about grid in answers is if I have a student that forgets it said round to the nearest hundredth, the decimal point usually comes above where it should. So it does help you a little bit knowing a hundredth means 2 decimal places after. I think, is that the graph question? I think this is the graph question we're talking about. Yep. Okay. So it says, if we have a home purchased in 2005, right? So in 2005, bit confused on the question, how to find the exact interest rate. It looks like there's a vertical line at the 2005. Gotcha. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we look at this, January 2005, I said, okay, that starts at 7.25, and then it goes up. So maybe from January to February, it kind of goes up here to 7.5. And this is, some people will pull their straight edge and say, oh, it went up even more than that, and that's about 7.55, right? We don't know exactly when. Right? So it just says the interest is charged based on the total amount of the loan. So we went into 2005. Now I know that the lowest interest amount that was charged would be 7.25, 0.0725, right? Times 450,000. My highest, I said, would be 7.5. So when I look at that, I'm just going to go in here again, 0.0725. When I entered the 7.25%, I got 32,625, which is right at B. When I put my 0.075, I ended up at 33,750. So my confusion here is some of my students, and I absolutely can see, the students said it's either B or C. They were good at getting that down. So they said that this is bought somewhere in the year 2005, right? So the issue is we're able to get A and D out. The SAT book, anyway, said that the correct answer is B. So when I look at this, and I was just kind of, for myself, struggling with this, going, okay, but this is $50 off here. The other answer was $50 off here, right? So if a home was purchased in 2005, what I ended up going with or looking at is saying, all right, this starts like right here, right? And then there was a jump. So since they didn't tell us where, they just said that it was a 10-year period. And we said that this was the first year, or the first, I guess, part from January to January. So I said, all right, if this is January, then we don't have to look at that part. So the idea here is, since I don't know when, the lowest interest amount that I could be paid is B. The next possible would be C. So it says approximately how much. And you're absolutely right. It could be a little weird. What I then did is I used the 0.0725 only because that was the beginning of the year and they were a little unclear on that. I actually wrote for clarification on this one, just asking the response that I'm not really sure. It said that if you're not told the month that it is rented with, you go with the starting interest rate of that. Okay. I did also ask if this was a common question still asked, or if there would be any kind of clarification or any kind of like vertical line in here drawn, right? So I know that it's between those two. I had one student also say that they would then take the average of these. Okay, so again, I absolutely agree. The question here was a little confused on this one. The correct answer that the College Board went with is B, but I don't agree necessarily that we should know that it's the beginning of the year. Okay. All right, looks like things are winding down a little bit with our Q&A. Everything is going well. Looks like answering. So we will log off for now, but I'm going to kind of flip to the end again. Have any questions, take a picture of this slide, or just shoot us an email or keep in touch on social media. Let us know how we can help. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Good luck on your SAT.